Joyce's poetry. He wrote to Ibsen and identified with him. He was championed by Pound. He fostered Beckett. He was an outsider from the start. All true. Yet at the very start his dealings were with Yeats and A.E. and that old hake Gregory, because at the very start verse was his medium. The poems were entered in longhand on folio sheets. They were shown to friends, to his brother Stanislaus, to W.B. Yeats, and through Yeats's assistants, they made their way to magazines and publishers. Joyce's first book was a sequence of 36 poems published in 1907 as chamber music. 20 years later, 12 more poems and a tilly thrown in appeared for a shilling as poems penny each. And when the collected poems came out in 1936, there was only one new poem added, the well-known Ecce Pur, written on the occasion of his father's death and the birth of his own grandson. This is the canon of his official verse. Unofficially, he released 2 broadsides, The Holy Office, 1904, and Gas from a Burner, 1912. For some novelists, Hardy and Lawrence, for example, verse offers itself as a medium for extending and refining apprehensions that their prose fiction has failed to render altogether satisfactorily. There are poems by Hardy and Lawrence which we would be inclined to keep in preference to certain parts of their novels. The same, however, cannot be said of Joyce. Sure, the poems are well-tuned and well-turned. There is a technical fastidiousness about them, a touch of elegy and pathos. But their chief interest is that they were written by Joyce. Their chief surprise, the surprise of contrast with other parts of the oeuvre. This stanza from Ecce Pur could be by Francis Ledwidge. Of the dark past a child is born, with joy and grief my heart is torn. There is a conventional touch to this, a kind of rehearsed tenderness that recalls a Celtic twilight poem like Padraic Colum's O Men from the Fields. The heavy end-stopping of the lines, the regular meter, the candid rhymes, it is an unexpectedly unsophisticated performance from an artist who, at the same time, was splitting the linguistic atom in Finnegan's Wake. If I seem to be doing Joyce down, he can stand it, because he himself set the standard by which he must be judged. The great poetry of the opening chapter of Ulysses, for example, amplifies and rhapsodizes the world with an unlooked-for accuracy and transport. It gives the spirit freedom to range in an element that is as linguistic as it is airy and watery, and when the poems are compared with writing that feels so natural, spacious, and unstoppably alive, they are seen to be what Yeats said the earliest of them were, the work of a man who is practicing his instrument, taking pleasure in the mere handling of the stops. Perhaps that is the way for us to take pleasure in them, at a slight aesthetic distance, with a connoisseur's awareness. And that, in fact, seems to be the way Joyce himself appreciated poetry. Stephen, in A Portrait of the Artist as a young man, like Joyce in real life, loves the songs of the Elizabethans, the mournful and melodious rhythms of Nashe and Dowland, and Shakespeare's songs. It is poetry as the handmaiden of music, as evocation, invitation to dream. Stephen is not worked upon by the poetry he remembers. Rather, he works upon it, savouring it and transposing it to the keyboard of his own mind and senses. In Portrait, the shock of recognition for Stephen comes in his encounter with a word like suck or tundish. Poetry, per se, evokes a less directly sensuous response, something more cultivated and delicate, and it would seem that Joyce aimed for just such a response when he wrote his own verse. What I am saying applies only to the official lyrics, the unofficial satires, those couplets that cut the air sometimes with the exact deadliness of a Toledo steel, sometimes with the thick-witted ferocity of a faction fighter's stick. Those are a different case, and remind me of one of the many triumphant and possessive insights in Stanislaus Joyce's My Brother's Keeper. Stanislaus there credits Yeats with divining that prose, not verse, would be his brother's medium, and then goes on, but I take personal satisfaction in recording that I was the first, and perhaps the only one, to understand that ruthlessness, not delicacy, would be the keynote of my brother's work. Right on, as they used to say in the Bay Area. Gas from a burner and the Holy Office may not be as self-consciously beautiful or as well finished as the lyrics, but they are in earnest. The language has all the roused expectation of a loosed ferret. The thing may be hurried, but it has angry momentum. And it is a performance. The connoisseur of styles is showing off, but at the same time, the hurt human being is giving vent to his rage. Significantly, this is the stuff that people tend to know by heart. To his Irish humour, wet and dry, flung quicklime into Parnell's eye. 'Tis Irish brains that save from doom the leaky barge of the Bishop of Rome. For everyone knows the Pope can't belch without the consent of Billy Walsh. O Ireland, my first and only love, where Christ and Caesar are hand and glove. The instrument is being put to work at last. Stand back there.